Hello, Prof. Gaëlle Vallée-Tourangeau speaking. Welcome to this recorded version of my webinar, How to Design and Run Behavioral Science Experiments Using Online Qualtrics, which are delivered for the Faculty of Business and Social Sciences in July 2020. I'll briefly review the three key elements of behavioral experiments, and then I will distinguish between independent groups from within group experimental designs, and really give you a very simple template for setting up experiments in Qualtrics from these two very simple designs using the survey flow and the random allocations. So without further ado, let's carry on. So what are behavioral experiments for? This is not a behavioral experiment, but this is an experiment. I've read somewhere that I can start a poll. It seems that I can, and that you can try and answer that question. So if I give you the following statement, the more money you make, the less time you spend talking to your spouse, how would you test this? Okay, so the answers, three of you have said by discussing with friends and colleagues. Two have said by running a survey using a representative design, and nobody checked running a control experiment. The correct answer here would be two. It's true that you could discuss the statement with friends and colleagues, but you would not be able to test it in this case because maybe your sample would not be representative or be too small to be able to actually test the statement. Now I put this here as an example of what is not an experiment, because here you'd have to measure two variables, but you could not control or experimentally manipulate the predictor, in this case, change people's salary to see whether it makes them talk or less, more or less to their spouse. Okay, so to understand experiment is to differentiate them from surveys. And even though Qualtrics is a survey software, you can actually use it to run experiments. Experiments are different from surveys because they test causality. So with surveys, you can gather polling data in the form of frequencies. This is a very recent example I've found to illustrate this. So frequencies would be if you have 58% or 69% of people agreeing with the statement, that would not be an experiment. With survey, you can also collect more than one variable, and you can move forward one step, which is looking at association. So things that seem to co-occur together, or seems to things that seems to be more or less likely. Right. So only with experiments you can test whether something causes a change in something else. So here's another example that I picked up from the news. And here you see that apparently there's a study in the University of Liverpool that identified that 153 people in hospital with very serious COVID-19 symptoms also had developed a neurological and psychiatric condition. So if you look at this as a statement, my question would be, why isn't this an experiment? Three of you were right. It's not an experiment because he only focuses on one part of the sample. He only looks at people who have bouts of severe bouts of COVID-19. So among these people, they have also developed psychiatric conditions, but perhaps all the people who were had COVID-19 were also had a shock, or maybe it's related to the COVID-19 virus, but maybe it's related to the situation in which they were, some kind of PTSD. So unless we have some sort of control group, we could not call this an experiment. It's just an association that would need to be tested. There's no causality that we could infer from that data. Okay, so what are the three key elements of a behavioral experiment? Put the most simple way, in a behavioral experiment, what you want to test is the effect of a cause that you manipulate on on a behavior. So what is here the manipulated cause? Could be an intervention, something you want to create to change behavior, or it could be something that you test to see whether it would make a difference to a behavior. So the first key element would be the cause. The second key element is the behavior. And the third key element would be something else that might cause the change that is not what you manipulated. Sometimes it's called a nuisance or an extraneous cause or variable. But the idea when you start thinking about experiment is you need to think about alternative explanation. Your cause is your explanation for the behavior, but then you also need to think what else could explain the changes that you might observe. Here's an example of a recent study, or fairly recent, where two people trying to understand how people judge how well they will feel rested after a holiday. And they wanted to test this belief that we think that a holiday will be much more enjoyable. We'll be able to relax more. We'll feel rested more if we have the vacation when the work is over, as opposed to at the beginning of the work. And what they wanted to show in that paper was that actually it doesn't matter when you have the holiday. What matters is you have a holiday. And so in this example, they showed that the proposed time of a vacation could change people's perception of how much they would enjoy their vacation. And here you have the predicted enjoyment, which they measured on a scale variable. And they actually, in their experiment, they talked about the start of the month or the end of the month, but in the illustration, I put start of term or end of term to make it more perhaps easy to conceptualize if you haven't read the paper. And what you find here is that the enjoyment is much lower when people have to imagine that they will start with a holiday at the start of term and then do all the work that they have to do, than when they have to a chance to complete all their work and then they have a holiday. So in this sense, we have a manipulated cause here, which is the timing of the holiday. If you're told that your holiday is at the beginning or at the end of term, and then you have a measure of behavior, which is how much you think you will enjoy your holiday when it takes place. So in terms of the technical names for these three elements, the manipulated cause is often named a independent variable. So in this case, it's the time of the holidays. And then the measured variable, or the behavior, is also known as the dependent variable. And in this case, that would be the predicted enjoyment of the holiday. Note that in this simple experiment, there was no control variable. There was no possible alternative cause. I've actually tried to replicate this one, and I found that if you measure also how well or how stressed people feel, you can actually reduce this effect. So a nuisance here, if you like, would be the state of mental well-being that people would experience. Okay, so this is a typical COVID-19 lecture when you have children in the background, I guess. Okay, so we have here an example of an experiment. And now we move on to what is the difference. So what is an independent group's experimental design? And what is an, later on, I will review a within group experimental design. So when you manipulate a cause, you have essentially two ways to do it. You can manipulate it in what's called independent groups. So here, if you take this example of an experiment, you have the start of the term holiday or the end of the term holiday. So the causal factor you're trying to test here is the time at which you propose that people would take their holiday. This would be called condition A or B. And each condition is referring to a different group of people. So you've got group A, and the setting is A. That would be the instruction, if you like, that mentioned that the holiday would be at the beginning of the term. And then in another group with different people, you could present everything the same, but change the instruction to say now your holiday are at the end of term. And you would still, in both cases, measure the behavior. And to test the effect of your cause, you would compare the behavior in this condition to the behavior in this other condition. Okay, this is where we now go to Qualtrics. How would you use Qualtrics to test this or to design this type of experiment?